Welcome to Below the Line, where we talk about working in Hollywood from the crew perspective. My name is Skid. I'm a former assistant director and your host.
Quiet on the set.
Welcome to season 23 of the podcast. With the Oscars in our rearview mirror, we return to our regularly scheduled programming. And today we're talking about Last Breath, the feature film starring Woody Harrelson, Simu Liu, and Finn Cole. It's currently playing in theaters, and my guest is the film's director, Alex Parkinson. Alex, welcome to Below the Line.
Thank you. Hello. Yes. Thank you for having me.
Very glad you're here. This is going to be a fun conversation, but a warning for listeners, it will contain spoilers. We mean that for real this time. So go see the movie and then come back and join us. Alex, as I understand it, Last Breath was originally a documentary that you put together in 2019, and you were the director of that as well. Tell me how that came together, just to give us some context for what this film is based on.
So I first heard about Chris's story, it's probably about 10 or 11 years ago now. Essentially, what happened was I bumped into a friend, he was out and about, and he just told me that he'd finished doing this health and safety video about the actual accident itself. He said, "Why don't you go and have a look at it and see what you think, see what could be, if there's any more legs to it at all." And it was just one of those things about where I put it on, watched 3 seconds of it pretty much. Well, that's a slight exaggeration or under exaggeration, probably about 30 seconds, and thought, this has got feature doc written all over it. And it just immediately, the story was so compelling. The people in the documentary sense, so the actual people involved, were so compelling as well. But also the other thing about it was, there are these two other things about it, which are that this world of saturation diving was something that I knew absolutely nothing about. And it was completely compelling for me to find out about this world, about these people who are going hundreds of feet underwater to work on oil pipelines, all this kind of stuff. It was fascinating to me, the world they inhabited. And sort of being a documentary maker, these kind of things I get really switched on by, because I have a natural curiosity about these things anyway. So I just love exploring that. But on top of that was the story itself, and the story of Chris and what he went through. And my jaw was just on the floor throughout when I was listening to the story. The main thing that I took away from it when I first heard it was, thankfully, I am never going to find myself 300 feet underwater in the pitch black with no light, no communication, no nothing. But the thing is, I could completely identify what Chris was going through. And that just told me immediately that although it's this extraordinary situation he was in, it had a universal truth behind it that any audience could connect with. And for me, those are two just such great ingredients to have as a starting point and build it out from there. And so from there, I got in contact with some producers for a friend of mine, and I basically just sent them the ROV footage of where Chris is found on top of the manifold. I sent them that, and then one line explaining what the film was. Not even a log line. It wasn't even that finely crafted. It was just a very prosaic, this is the story of what happened. And within 5 minutes, they were calling me back going, right, we're going to make this into a documentary. This is just going to be brilliant. Because that footage of where the ROV finds him on top of the manifold is just, I mean, the documentary was sold on that. It's just so chilling to see that. All these ingredients came together to make what hopefully people think is a great feature doc in the first instance. And yeah, so from there it took about 4 years to find the funding and get it actually made from there, basically.
So in terms of putting the documentary together, talk to me about the integration of actual footage and what's reconstructed.
The actual footage of the incident is what you call black box footage. It was they record all this stuff all the time on these ships in case an incident or an accident happens, precisely for that reason. They can go back and analyze what happened. And so from the night itself of the real incident, all the footage I actually had access to was the ROV footage about where he's found and they follow him being taken up to the bell, and the helmet cam footage of Dave and Chris on the bottom. But then that obviously cuts out when the umbilical gets snapped. And then there's a bit inside the bell as well, but then that also cuts out as well when the umbilical snapped, and it came back after Chris had been resuscitated inside the bell. So I think in total, roughly, there's only about 5 minutes of real footage in the whole film. And so it's not an enormous amount of footage to start with, But then it's just finding ways of building it out from there, basically, and building up the film. And I was very keen from the outset to not give away that Chris survived, because that's such a crucial thing about placing you with the people on the night, placing the audience with them, where you just don't know whether it's going to live or die. And that was such a crucial thing that I had to do in the narrative to do that. But then that presents its own problem: is how do you care about him if you're not going to hear about him in an interview and all this kind of stuff? And I had this sort of light bulb moment while, I mean, I roughly storyboarded the whole documentary because I wanted to help with the interview structure and interview planning, actually, anyway. And I just had this light bulb moment of thinking, well, you know what, Morag and Chris, they used to send each other videos, which they really did do when he was offshore. I thought, well, why don't I get Chris to go around to my period accurate 2012 Handycam, go around the ship and do that as though he's actually sending a video to his wife, fiance, Morag. So that's how the audience, got to know him. And the thing was that Chris was just absolutely superb at doing it. He was a natural at doing it. And I deliberately didn't direct him in the sense of, I didn't say, get a cutaway of that or do that or this, that, and the other, because you want it to be rough and ready. You want it to feel like a guy who's not thinking about this is going to be in a film. This is a guy just sending a rough and ready video to his fiance. So I was very deliberate about not directing him, but just giving him some talking points. So that was a really effective way of getting to know Chris. So we didn't have to see him in an interview until the moment he's revealed to live, to have survived. So those are the basic elements. And then from there, I lent on my sort of documentary background. I wanted to sort of blur the boundary between documentary and reconstruction. And so the start of the film is very, very much filmed as observational documentary feel to it, of the ship going out to sea and all those kind of things, which I actually shot myself. I was on board shooting all of that. And then the idea was to then bleed that into the reconstructions. And so you just couldn't tell what was documentary and what was reconstruction, with the intent being that the audience is in the story, they're completely immersed and they're not bothered about what is real and what is reconstruction. So the story comes to the fore. And that was always my intent with the documentaries, to do that.
Well, I know I went and watched the documentary before I saw the film, and I really enjoyed it. And I think to that very point, to place me inside of it, you're not just explaining what happened, but really the drama and the tension that is being experienced by all the people involved. Yeah, I think that comes through. When you're putting this together, though, so what kind of crew do you have to help prepare a documentary with all the extra footage you shot and then editing and such? How large is the team?
Oof. Well, frighteningly small generally. I mean, as I said, the sort of documentary element of it on board was myself and somebody doing sound, essentially, and that was it. Which is great because I mean, I've shot lots of my own material over the years, and it just makes you very agile. And also it's great because it's at that moment when I'm kind of working out what the story is as well. So I'm finding all these shots and thinking about how it's going to stylistically feel. So for me, it's like catnip. I can just go out and film stuff whenever I want. I'm on board. I get up at 2 a.m, think, well, I'm going to film some night shots and not worry about anyone else. I can get up and do it. So it's great for all of that kind of stuff. And then, yes, I mean, that's essentially it. And then obviously the underwater reconstruction, I didn't film. And that's obviously a slightly bigger crew. So I had a guy called Eric Bordstein, he's Swedish. And he did the underwater work. So he had his small team with him as well. So his assistants to do all of that kind of stuff. So the underwater work definitely had a bigger crew, because by the very nature of it being underwater, you need safety divers and all that kind of stuff. But then the reconstructions, which I also shot as well, some of them were on board the ship and they were done with the real crew, and lots of them were the actual people who were on board on the night as well, to give you that sort of level of authenticity. And then we did some stuff around, there's a hyperbaric centre in Aberdeen around there. And so for that was a slightly bigger crew. The producers were there, the co-director was there, and all that kind of stuff. So it's compared to feature film levels, it's a frighteningly small crew.
And Alex, you pointed out, I'm not sure that I recognized what was reconstruction underwater in the documentary. What parts did you reconstruct of the underwater stuff? Again, that, as you said, you only had the helmet cams, and even that got lost when the umbilical snaps.
Yeah.
So there's still things in there that I'm sure that if I go back and watch it again, I might notice because we've had the conversation, but at the time it didn't jump out at me.
I mean, there's quite a lot of what I would call constructed archive, I would say. And that's not to sound slippery, but it's a very specific way of approaching it in my mind. So lots of the stuff of them in the sat chambers, for example, you feel that that is real, and that is actually really them, obviously, because you can see it is, but it's done contemporaneously to a documentary being made. So we had to wait months for them to all be on rotation again together to then be able to get that footage, essentially.
Makes sense.
And then there's also some, we didn't have an ROV. We had an ROV for the feature, but not for the documentary. So there's certain amounts of stuff we purloined from other dives where we use that as though it was from the actual dive itself. It's mainly with CCTV stuff in the saturation chamber. Some of that was constructed. So like the bit where the medic holds his hand at the end, that was reconstructed. That wasn't real. I mean, that obviously happened, but we didn't have the footage for that. So that was reconstructed. So it's just, it's as and when, basically. I wanted to keep the feel of it and this sort of, for want of a better word, the verisimilitude correct to what's going on, basically, and make it feel all within that world. And then obviously it's quite obvious when it's the underwater reconstruction because it's no longer CCTV, it's properly shot. But I think by that point, you're so not worried about any of that it just doesn't occur at all. It's all part of that world.
Right. No, I would agree. So the documentary comes out in 2019. Talk to me about the process then of it becoming a feature film.
So it came out in 2019, and then the producers, my UK producers at Met Film, Al Moyer and Stu LaMarichelle, they showed it to this producer called Paul Brooks, who did things like Pitch Perfect and things like that. And he absolutely loved it. And then was on the phone to them the next day saying, I want to make this into a feature film, essentially. So he teamed up with his son, David Brooks, as well. And they sort of started developing it. And I was originally involved as a exec producer. So I was looking at the scripts and giving comments back. And then they were scouting around for a director to do it. And I obviously put my hat in the ring. And initially, the general sentiment was, well, you've done documentary. What's your actual feature experience? And well, truthfully, zero. So so it's like, well, you're not going to have much chance of doing it. So unfortunately, it's probably not going to happen. But then when Paul and David got involved, they were scouting around for a director, and somebody in LA said to them, well, why don't you speak to the guy to the documentary, see if he's interested? So I got a call about it, and I'm obviously going to say yes. I'm not going to say no. So I pitched for it and then sort of gave my vision for it, which is very much about rooting it in that sort of gritty reality and not sort of going for Hollywood tropes and trying to keep it as real and gritty as possible. Because as I've always said about this story, the truth behind it is so fantastical. You just don't need to make stuff up about it. So it's about keeping it in that reality. And then that sort of spawns out, which I'm sure we'll talk about later on, that sort of spreads out into the production design, camera work, and everything else as well. So to go back, so it wasn't just like a phone call from the producers and saying, do you want to do it? And then you're on board. I obviously, because, and rightly so, I had to sort of go through a long process of about 6 months to sort of prove that I could do it, basically. And I completely get that, and I completely understand that, because I've had no feature experience. So it's completely fair enough. So part of that involved doing a lookbook and having my pass on the scripts and sort of getting into that and sort of rewriting bits of it. Yeah, and then at the end of that process, you get a phone call and go, we want you to do it. And it's like, my God, this is amazing. So yeah. So it's a really great process to go through that and sort of get to know the producers as well, and sort of go through all that process. And in that sense was superb. And they were immensely supportive throughout and really wanted me to do it. They weren't sort of testing me. They were just sort of getting me to a point where I could do it. And that's a really, really special thing for them to have done for me and to experience. So, yeah.
Yeah, their support in getting you ready for your feature film debut and cultivating what you brought probably in your documentary experience and applying it to the film, I see parallels between what you talked about with the approach to the documentary and where you want the audience to be during the course of the story. And I see some parallels of that in the film. But talk to me big picture about what is the same and what is different between the two projects.
One of the interesting things which is the same, because I mean, as we were talking about the story, essentially, obviously, but it's about how it's structured as well, because the very fact of how it unfolds kind of lends itself in feature sense to follow that same path. And also in the feature, I was very keen to make it in real time. The actual incident itself is 36 minutes, almost exactly to the second of the actual incident as well. So that sort of naturally happened. But the big difference, I would say, is that with documentary, you obviously have talking heads. You have people who can tell you what you're looking at and what they were thinking and feeling at that point in time. That naturally drives the documentary because you want the audience to understand what's going on. And so it kind of flips what was going on, because in the documentary, I was trying to make it as cinematic and as filmic as possible, but was in the confines of documentary tradition in that sense. But then when it came to the feature, you don't have those talking heads anymore. So therefore, a lot of my pass of the script was about how do you get this information? How do you get this world which nobody really understands or knows about? How do you get people to understand that world at a comfortable level so they're not confused by things, but in an unclunky way, in an organic way? And that was a really intellectually pleasing and challenging thing to do, going through the script and getting things to come out organically, where you sort of just take on board and understand the world you're in, because it's so crucial that you have basic understanding of it, so that when things go wrong, you're not asking questions or trying to work out what's happening. So that first 20 minutes was really crucial to get that right, where you feel you're part of this world. And so that was a big, big difference from the documentary to feature, is about how that information comes out, that world building. And it's much more about it being experiential. You're immersing the audience in the world rather than telling them what the world is. And it's a very interesting, different approach of doing things in that way. And I loved it. Intellectually, it's really fascinating. So that's a big difference, obviously, about the approach. At the other end of it, I was thinking about this the other day, actually, is that you have a documentary where it's a tiny, tiny crew, and then you and an editor in a room cutting for 6 months or whatever. But it all comes down to the same thing at the end of the day in the feature as well. It's still you and the editor looking at the footage, making the best of what you can out of it. And it's really interesting. We have this massive crew, but it still comes down to two people in a room at the end of the day, making the right choices and putting it together in the correct way. So it's fascinating about the similarities and the differences, but there is a surprising amount of commonality I found as well.
Well, talk to me more about putting together that production crew. You're coming from a do-it-yourself filming documentary, but now you do have a lot of people involved. How did that come together? Who did you select? The producers help bring folks in. Just talk to me about building out your team.
Well, I think it's fair to say it's from a standing start, because I knew nobody in feature film at all. So I don't have anyone to call upon and think about who an HOD could be. So it's literally just being sent lots of CVs, having lots of chats with people, and just finding people I connected with and people who got the story. And the amazing thing about the documentary, having the documentary is like a calling card, is that everybody involved in the film got involved with it because they loved the documentary and they wanted to tell that story the best they could. And so you have this connection with these people immediately about the enthusiasm for the story and wanting to tell that story in the best way possible. And so I had amazing people I could never have imagined who wanted to actually be the HODs. So, for example, with Ian Seabrook, the underwater DP, who is just the most incredible underwater DP. He's done Indiana Jones, he did Mission Impossible, all these incredible films. So Ian wanted to get involved because he saw the documentary independently of being approached to do the film. And he just jumped at the chance to be involved because he loved the story and he loved to be part of it. So all these world-class people want to be involved in the film because for one, they saw the documentary and loved it, and also met me and they liked me and they liked talking to me, and we had a connection that we wanted to make a film in a certain way. And so it's just like yeah, it's like a series of first dates, really, isn't it? Where you go through that, and it's all you're sort of working out whether you have that connection with people or not. And it was a great process to go through, and just I don't want to sound over egg this, but it was just such a privilege from from my background with documentary to suddenly be in this feature world of where I'm meeting all these people. I've seen their films, I know what they've done, and talk to them on a level playing field in that way was a phenomenal experience and great. And I think that comes out in the film. You can see that people have gone the extra mile and they're bringing their absolute best they can to a film to make it the best it can be, and it's just great.
Now, because of my background, I have a soft spot for your AD team and working with a first time director. Talk to me about how the team supported you on this and how that relationship developed.
Well, Jude, again, that was all through the series of first dates, but Jude was my favorite out of all of them. So Jude Campbell was the first AD. He was just a phenomenal organizer. He was just fantastic at putting stuff together and looking at the storyboard. So before, as part of this process I was talking about sort of going through it with the producers, to sort of get to a level where I was ready to be and confident they could direct it, I storyboarded all of the underwater sequences and a lot of the opening sequences as well. And working with Jude, it was just phenomenal. He looked at it, broke it down, picked out certain bits, put it on a big board in the office he was in, and just breaking that down because it was so complicated. Just the underwater bits was so complicated because it was where we were doing some shots for the actors, then other shots for the doubles, then some of the stunt people, about how to organize all of that timing where he did a phenomenal job organizing all that because we were on such a tight schedule as well. So it's great to have that head because I've never worked with a first AD before.
Alex, how long was your shooting schedule? How many days of filming did you guys have?
So we had 42 or 43 days in total. To memory, that broke down to being 10 days in the bell and doing the saturation chambers. I mean, that was Woody's block, was 10 days. Then we had 3 weeks in the tank, so 15 days in the tank, through all the underwater stuff. And then there was 2 weeks of second unit after that as well. And then there was 2 weeks on the bridge as well. That was all the stuff in Malta. And then we had a week in Scotland, because all the location stuff.
So, as you mentioned Malta, talk to me about the attraction of filming there and what made that a good location for this movie, for the work you were doing.
The big thing that drew us there in the first place was the fact that it had a big tank. It had a huge tank, which is 100 meters across and 11 meters deep. And that was perfect for doing all the underwater work. So we could get some scope and scale. So we could come back and we could see the structure. We could see the whole of the manifold underwater and crucially, not catch the water surface, the underside.
That would have shattered the illusion a little bit about being so deep in the water. Have you
Completely, yeah. So, but it's actually really hard to avoid it sometimes, and Ian did a great job of avoiding that, obviously. But it's really hard to avoid it. So a lot of skillful camera work from Ian there to do that. But so that was one of the main reasons that drew us to Malta, and then also all the sets for the sat chamber. Yeah, the sat chamber room, and then also the bridge was there as well. Yeah, so all the actual sets were built in Malta, and the thing is, we could have them all next to each other. So there's all could be done in one place, one time, and just do a sort of one-stop shop for all of that. So it's great for that. Yeah, it worked really well for that.
And so the bridge of the ship and the bells and such, you have reconstructed these on set. Is that a safe assumption that you can move the walls around and all these things like you would on a typical set? You're not trying to film those things on a boat or in an actual bell.
No, in a work. That would just be so hard to do. And filming in a boat, as I did do for the documentary, and I've spent decades filming on boats for other things. It's very, very time-consuming and hard, and you don't want to do that unless you have to, essentially. So. So all of that, but it's interesting you talk about removing walls, though. With the sat chambers, I didn't want any, I mean, there were removable walls and they were built in, but I didn't want them used in the end because I wanted to keep it. I wanted the camera to sort of be forced to do certain things, which you only can do because you're in that space essentially. And so it sort of added to that idea of claustrophobia. And it goes back to what I was saying in the documentary as well about, I think the audience is sophisticated enough to just know when they're seeing certain camera angles, they just understand that it's a confined space. And I think if you sort of take walls out, which obviously in some circumstances can be enormously beneficial and very useful, but I think if you start doing that, you can make it. I think the audience suddenly realizes that it's not quite real. I think it's a subconscious thing. I don't think it's a conscious thing at all. But I think when you start getting impossible angles, I think it doesn't keep that claustrophobia. It doesn't keep that space integral, I don't think. So I was very keen to sort of the camera to be forced to do certain things because of that. Then having said that, with the bell, it just had to be done with camera ports. There was just no way that it could be done otherwise because there just was not a space to get a camera in there and the actors. So that had to be done for that reason. But I think it works well for that. But I think whenever I could, I wanted to keep the camera in the space as much as possible.
So, Alex, first time director, talk to me about lessons learned or when having this crew may have surprised you, like things that you didn't expect because of your background. But again, you've got a full crew supporting this film.
The communication is the first thing, because if I'm shooting myself and I'm with one other person, a lot of it exists in my head and I'm just doing it. If I'm shooting something, if I want to change camera angle, I don't need to tell anyone. I just do it. And that's a very fluid way of working. And obviously it's very quick and it sort of all just goes on. And also it allows a lot of experimentation. And it also, if I get something wrong, I don't have to tell anyone. It's just, if I misfocus, it's like, let's just hope I'll do that again. And then we get it, it's fine. But so there's all of that. So then going to this crew where you're sort of the top of this creative pyramid, where you have you, then the HODs, and this crew sort of cascading down from there. Communication was the first most crucial thing to get my head around and get used to doing. It's not like I can't communicate, but it's just thinking, well, what do I need to communicate? What can I, to make it clear to them what my vision is? And just that took a bit of time to get used to. But once I was in the flow of it, it was fine. And again, it comes down to my great HODs I had. They were all incredible HODs. So it's all fine and all great. But it's just sort of externalizing a lot of your thoughts when you're very used to it all playing out in your head. Just took that bit of time to get used to. And that sort of carries on to the film set as well. As I was alluding to earlier, if I want to change shot, it's literally, I just move the camera and it's there and it's changed. Whereas obviously when you're doing a properly lit, fully lit drama set and all these kind of things don't move at that pace. So it's got to be a lot more considered what happens rather than sort of be more fluid. And there were moments when I wanted to change shots in the moment, do things, but then Jude, the AD, would make it very clear, and rightly so, going, well, if you want to do that, that's going to be half an hour to do that. Are you sure you want to do it? Okay, yeah, let's do it. So it's a different thought process. It's a longer, more considered thought process. But yeah, I mean, I completely understand why it's like that, because it's obviously a set of 150 people or whatever. It's obviously going to take time to do things, and people would work in different ways, and there's many more considerations coming to play with that. So it's a fascinating learning process for me as well, doing that.
Another big difference, of course, between the documentary and the feature film is now you're dealing with actors who have their own visions of these characters and are trying to bring them to life. Talk to me about working with Woody and Simu and Finn on this project.
I think Simu and Finn had seen the documentary beforehand, and Duncan. I'm getting into the characters now. Woody saw the documentary when getting involved with the film, and again, it's a great starting point when you're doing this story as realistically as possible and keeping it gritty. You've got a great starting point, and the conversation is already rolling in the documentary, and so it was just great about honing it in and then getting their input and their take on it and how they want to develop the characters. So it's just a great dialogue, and it's a very it's a very easy and fluid discussion to have. It was really straightforward, amazingly straightforward. I mean, as I've said to many people before, it's just a really weird thing that the first time I'd ever been on a working film set ever was on the first day of filming this, and it was Woody, Seymour, and Finn. That was my first time ever setting onto a working film set. But they were all incredibly supportive again, but they're all world-class actors. They know what they're doing. They're fantastic at what they do, and they were perfect for the roles which they were playing. So it became a pretty straightforward discussion, as it should be, and a creative discussion where we're pushing each other to make it the best we can. Yeah, I remember that first day where I was expecting to be really nervous about what was going on, but again, from the support of the producers and the people around me and all this kind of stuff, it was really, really pretty. I got used to it pretty quickly. All this work, it comes down to when you focus on that frame, that one frame on the monitor, you're looking at it, you're blocking everything else out, and then it all comes to life. And it is just utterly magical. I mean, that's what movies and cinema is about. Obviously, that's why we all do it. But it's just magical when you see it for the first time. It's really, really phenomenal.
As I mentioned earlier, I saw the documentary before I went and saw the feature film, and so it was fresh in my mind. Talk to me about the decision with the film to use some actual footage, both to open the film. I think you talked about that shot of the manifest and how powerful that was, and then also at the end of the film, using some footage and some parallels to the documentary, but really the decision to not recreate that stuff in the actual movie with the actors.
I think probably perversely, it's because I did it with a documentary, and I thought, well, why not do it the other way around with a feature? And feed in some real footage. And I think it does also come back to the idea of the documentary was sold on that footage of coming up over the manifold and finding Chris there. That's the kind of thing that is really almost impossible to recreate, because the person filming that, the real ROV pilot who was filming that, he wasn't filming it thinking of anything other than that I have to capture this, while going through all the emotions he was doing of thinking I'm seeing my crewmate die. Gives a look and a feel to something that I genuinely believe is really, really difficult, if not impossible, to recreate. About how it's framed, where he goes, when he decides to land it, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I just think if it works and it doesn't jar with the feature footage, I'm going to use it, because I think that's really crucial to do that. And I think the thing is that what you haven't noticed, actually, you didn't pick up that the real footage was used for all the ROV stuff of where Chris is found in the body of the film. That's all the real footage as well. I mean, it's intercut as well with the ROV footage we had, but the footage of him lying on the side, on top of the manifold twitching, that is all the real footage. So it's interesting that you worked out and you knew immediately that it's bookended by real footage,
right?
But the actual real footage is sprinkled throughout as well. So I think that's testament to how it meshes in with the film perfectly, seamlessly. So that's great. That's really great that you didn't pick up on that. So thank you.
No, I didn't. But what I did pick up on, and a difference between the documentary and the film, is that in the film, we spend a lot more time with Chris when he's underwater and facing the challenge of his umbilical breaking. But the documentary leaves that space kind of quiet. Talk to me about the differences in the approach.
In the documentary, I chose not to show Chris on the bottom in the body of it, main body of it, until it's revealed that he survived. And the main reason for that was that I absolutely wanted the audience to align with the people on the ship. I wanted them to be thinking, what has happened to him? We don't know whether he's dead, torn to pieces, alive. We just don't know what's going on with him at all. It's crucial for that sort of the tension to build up in the documentary, whereby you're with the crew, you're hearing the crew talk about, we don't know what's happened to him. And then if you showed him on the seabed at that point, you're giving away what's happened to him. So it kind of kills that tension there. So that's why I didn't do it with the documentary. But with the feature, because it's not going to be revealed in the same way that Chris survived, then there was much more to play with. And because you're aligned with him as a character in a different way to the documentary. So in that sense, you're with him, you're rooting for him, you want to know what's going on at that point, and the tension of that with what's going on up above Dramatically, it works in an entirely different way. And I think it works very well in the feature to see him underwater like that. Because you couldn't show him being surviving and then spin back to that in the feature. It just wouldn't work structurally to do that. So that was a key difference of the film to the documentary, definitely.
Well, so Alex, are we going to see a sequel? If this film does great, do you think the next to last breath? What?
Well, you see, the thing is that with Chris, he's got a nickname of 9 Lives Lemons. This is not the first time he's had a brush with death. So, I mean, there's an incident, I think it's about 5 years prior to this, when he got buried alive in an avalanche and very, very nearly died then. And there was another occasion when he got swept out to sea, and there was another occasion when but also, crucially, the thing is that I think actually one of the reasons he did survive in reality is because he'd learned that he could be rescued, and he could be rescued. So I think this gave him a sort of a sense of calm and being able to deal with the situation. So, I mean, I think there's something to that, because he's been in at least 4 or 5 life-threatening, like almost dying situations, and this is only one of them. So I think there's prequels, definitely, but hopefully not sequels. I don't know.
Right. Well, we'll watch for those. On that note, we're going to call it a wrap. Alex, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Listeners, I always appreciate your feedback. You'll find my contact info at our website, belowtheline.biz. That's B-I-Z. You'll also find past episodes and links to all of our social media, so check it out. Alex, what is next for you?
I have got 3 scripts that I'm working on with various producers. So they're in different stages of development. So hopefully one of them will be getting into production soon.
And so you're going to stick in this feature film world now, or you see yourself going back to documentary? Where's your pull?
You know, I think I've been bitten by the feature film bug. There's something about the watching in a cinema with people. I mean, I'm a very, very, very frustrated musician. So I used to play live quite a lot. And I used to play a lot of gigs, and for me, watching your film on the big screen with a big audience is as near as I'm going to get to playing a gig that you can get. And it's just very addictive to see people and be with people react to your film like that. So yeah, I think I'm definitely bitten.
Good luck, Alex. Good luck.
Thank you.
Closing credits, thanks to Curtis Five for our music, John Wan for our logo, and to all of our listeners, I appreciate you. The Below the Line logo is available on t-shirts, mugs, and stickers at redbubble.com. Please rate us wherever you get your podcasts and tell your friends. Thanks again from Below the Line.
Sorry, is that coming through? My son is screaming at Fortnite or something. Can you hear him in the background?
I do not hear him. You're clean.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
Okay. That's part of my one-man banding it of listening to sound the whole time as well. Yeah.